Now, what happens in the case of non-competitive inhibitors? In non-competitive inhibitors, as usual, your substrate with the active site, your enzyme with the active site is like this. Let me draw a better enzyme for you. Your enzyme with the active site looks like this, right? And you expect the substrate to bind to give us, as usual, the enzyme back and some products, right? This is what we expect. But what happens is the inhibitor does not compete for the binding site. The purpose of the inhibitor is to just bind to some site, and I'm taking this as our inhibitor. It wants to bind at some site, thereby distorting the structure. So what it does bind to the enzyme at some site. So let's say something like this, at some other site. It doesn't have to be the active site. So it will say bind somewhere here. So it will bind here, let's say, and then it will change this, it will distort this. So by binding here, it will distort the actual active site, and so our substrate cannot bind here. Our substrate cannot bind here at this point. So what happens? Your enzyme substrate complex will not be formed and you will not get the product. So the purpose of non-competitive inhibitor is to not to compete for the active site. It will just bind to some random site at the enzyme, and then it will distort the enzyme, thereby changing the active site, and thus it will prevent our substrate to bind to the active site.